The champagne tower trembled as Madison's voice cut through the reception hall like shattered glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise a toast to my brother Owen, the family loser who finally showed up in something other than thrift store rags." 200 guests turned toward me, their laughter rippling across marble floors I'd chosen myself 3 years ago. Madison didn't know I owned Hartwell Estate, the most exclusive wedding venue in Charleston. She was about to find out. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in October, thick cardstock embossed with gold script that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I found it wedged between a utility notice and a flyer for Thai takeout, Madison's looping handwriting declaring her upcoming nuptials to Charleston's most eligible bachelor at the historic Hartwell Estate. I sat at my kitchen table, a refinished piece I'd restored from a curb find, and read it 3 times before the irony settled in my chest like cold coffee. Madison didn't know Hartwell Estate belonged to me. None of my family did. To them, I was still Owen Barrett, the quiet younger brother who dropped out of college to work construction, who showed up to holidays in worn jeans and work boots, who'd never climbed their ladder of country clubs and corner offices. My mother introduced me to her friends as our son who does manual labor, her voice dipping with practiced embarrassment. My father stopped asking about my career after I turned down his offer to join his law firm for the 3rd time. I'd bought Hartwell Estate under an LLC 3 years ago, using the profits from flipping foreclosed properties, a side business I'd started at 22 with a maxed-out credit card and a borrowed truck. The estate had been crumbling then, a forgotten antebellum mansion with a caved-in ballroom and gardens choked with kudzu. I'd spent 18 months restoring it myself, every weekend stripping wallpaper and rewiring chandeliers until it became Charleston's most sought-after venue. My manager Diane handled bookings. My name appeared nowhere on the website. The wedding was scheduled for December 14th. Madison had written a personal note at the bottom of the invitation in purple ink. "Try to look presentable, Owen. Blake's family is very important." The capitals made my jaw tighten. I'd met Blake exactly once at last year's Christmas dinner where he'd spent 20 minutes explaining cryptocurrency to me like I was 12. Madison had laughed, touching his arm, saying Owen doesn't really understand business. I called Diane that afternoon. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and efficient. "Hartwell Estate, this is Diane speaking. It's Owen. I need to check something about the December 14th booking." Papers rustled in the background. The Barrett-Montgomery wedding, gorgeous event. The bride specifically requested our premium package, crystal chandeliers, the rose garden ceremony space, champagne fountain. She's called 6 times this month about napkin colors. Diane paused. "Why do you ask?" "That's my sister's wedding." I watched a cardinal land on my fire escape, its red feathers bright against gray November sky, and she has no idea I own the place. Diane's silence stretched 3 heartbeats. Oh, that's delicious. What do you want to do?" "Nothing, yet." I traced the invitation's gold border with my thumb. "Just keep my name out of everything. I want to see how this plays out." The weeks before the wedding crawled by like traffic on Meeting Street. Madison called twice, once to ask if I'd please wear the navy suit Mom bought you for interviews, and once to inform me I'd been seated at table 18 near the kitchen doors with some of Blake's distant cousins who probably won't even show up. I said yes to the suit and nothing about the table. My mother called 3 times to remind me not to embarrass Madison by talking about construction work with Blake's father, who owned a portfolio of surgical centers. I spent those weeks finishing touches at Hartwell. The December wedding season was our busiest, 4 events that month, each one sold out months in advance. I personally installed new lighting in the bridal suite, replaced cracked tiles in the conservatory, and supervised the restoration of a fountain Madison had specifically requested for photos. My hands knew every inch of that building, every plaster medallion I'd repaired, every floorboard I'd sanded, every garden path I'd redesigned with native plants that would bloom in stages through the season. On December 13th, the day before the wedding, I drove to Hartwell at dawn. The estate glowed in early light, its white columns wrapped with evergreen garlands and white lights. Diane met me at the service entrance with coffee and a clipboard. "Everything's ready," she said. "The flowers arrive at 8, catering at 10. Your sister's doing her rehearsal dinner at the yacht club tonight. She studied my face. You okay with this? You could always tell her. I shook my head. Madison spent our whole lives making sure everyone knows she's the successful one. Let her have her day. I just want to watch from table 18 near the kitchen. Diane, I own the kitchen. I smiled. I can watch from anywhere. The wedding morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of December day Charleston does best, all blue sky and crisp air that smells like salt and tea olive. I dressed in the navy suit my mother had bought, the one I'd never worn, and drove to Hartwell at 2. Guest parking attendants directed me to a spot near the camellia bushes I'd planted myself 2 springs ago. I walked through the front entrance like any other guest, signed the book at a table draped in champagne silk, and found my place card at table 18. Blake's distant cousins hadn't shown up. I sat alone, watching staff I'd hired arrange centerpieces I'd approved. The ceremony space looked flawless, white chairs on crushed shell paths, an arch wrapped in roses and magnolia, the rose garden I'd designed as a backdrop. Madison would get exactly what she'd paid for. She just didn't know she'd paid me. The ceremony started at 4. Madison looked beautiful in a dress that probably cost more than my truck, her blonde hair pinned in complicated waves. Blake stood at the altar in a tuxedo that fit like it had been drawn on. My mother dabbed tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. My father stood straight as a deposition witness. I sat in the back row and listened to vows about partnership and respect and building a life together. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the guests applauded. I clapped once, twice, then stopped, because Madison turned, her eyes scanning the crowd, and when she found me in my second-hand shoes and discount suit, she smiled. Not a kind smile, the smile of someone who'd won something. The reception was a blur of speeches I didn't listen to and courses I barely tasted. Blake's father gave a toast about legacy and ambition. My mother spoke about Madison's accomplishments, her marketing director title, her downtown condo, her impeccable taste. No one mentioned me except to point out empty seats at my table. I was nearly invisible, which was exactly what Madison wanted, until the champagne tower moment. Madison had insisted on a champagne tower. 7 tiers of crystal coupes stacked in a pyramid, bottles of Dom Perignon flowing from the top like a fountain. It was excessive and showy and exactly her style. I watched from my corner table as staff carefully arranged each glass, their movements precise. I'd trained half of them myself. Blake stood beside the tower with a microphone, his smile white and confident. "Before we pour, Madison has something she'd like to share." He handed her the microphone, his hand settling possessively on her waist. Madison's cheeks were flushed from champagne and attention. She wore her triumph like the diamond necklace at her throat, expensive and hard. "Thank you all for being here on the most important day of my life. Blake and I are so grateful to share this celebration with people who matter." Her eyes swept the room, landing on me for just a moment before moving on. "You know, when I booked Hartwell Estate, I told Blake I wanted only the best venue, the best food, the best people." She paused for effect, letting her audience lean in. "Because I've worked so hard to get where I am, unlike some people." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. My mother's smile went tight at the edges. Madison continued, emboldened by champagne and the microphone's power. "Some people are content with mediocrity, with dead-end jobs and thrift store lives. But I wanted to show everyone tonight that success is possible when you actually try." She raised her glass toward me, her gesture broad enough that nearby tables turned to look. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise a toast to my brother Owen, the family loser who finally showed up in something other than thrift store rags." The ballroom went silent, not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, but the shocked hush of witnessing something cruel. 200 people turned to stare at me. My mother closed her eyes, my father's jaw clenched. Blake looked uncertainly between Madison and the crowd, his smile frozen. I stood slowly. The navy suit suddenly felt less like armor and more like borrowed skin. I could have stayed silent. Could have let it roll off like all the other small cuts Madison had delivered over the years. But something shifted in my chest, not anger exactly, but a tired kind of clarity. "Madison," I said, my voice carrying without a microphone because I designed the room's acoustics myself, "I think there's something you should know." Her smile flickered. "Owen, I was just joking about Hartwell Estate." I took 3 steps toward the champagne tower, close enough that the whole room could see both of us. You said you wanted only the best venue. You made that very clear in your booking agreement. Madison's face went careful. Yes, and they delivered. This place is perfect. It is, I agreed. I'm glad you think so, because I built most of it with my own hands. I gestured toward the ceiling, where restoration work I'd completed 18 months ago still showed subtle differences in the plasterwork, details only I would notice. Those ceiling medallions. I restored them myself. The ballroom floor, refinished it over 6 weekends. The rose garden where you got married, I designed and planted every bed. Blake stepped forward, his voice falsely jovial. Owen, buddy, I think the champagne's gone to your head. I own Hartwell Estate. The words came out level and calm, dropping into the silence like stones into still water. Bought it 3 years ago through my LLC. Spent 18 months restoring it. Your wedding contract, I approved it personally. Every detail you requested, every napkin color you agonized over, every last demand about champagne fountains and crystal chandeliers, I signed off on all of it. Madison's champagne flute trembled in her hand. That's not, you can't, Diane, I called toward the main doors where my manager stood with her tablet. Could you bring over the ownership documents? Diane walked across the ballroom like she'd done this 100 times, her heels clicking on floors I'd sanded. She handed me a leather folder without a word. I opened it to the first page, the LLC registration, the deed transfer, my signature in blue ink. I held it up so Madison could see. Owen Barrett, sole owner. I kept my voice gentle, not cruel, but clear enough that every guest could hear. The family loser built the venue for your dream wedding. Madison's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine: shock, disbelief, anger, humiliation. She looked at Blake, who stared at the documents like they might bite him. She looked at my mother, who'd gone very pale. She looked at the champagne tower, still waiting to be poured, its crystal glasses catching light from chandeliers I'd personally rewired. You're lying. Her voice came out thin. This is some kind of joke, some pathetic attempt to ruin my wedding because you're jealous. I'm not jealous, Madison. I closed the folder and handed it back to Diane. I'm just tired of being called a loser by someone who doesn't know the first thing about what I do. I looked around at the guests, at their stunned faces and half-raised phones. I restore buildings. I create spaces where people celebrate the best days of their lives. I started with nothing but a maxed-out credit card and a borrowed truck, and I built something beautiful. That's not losing, that's winning differently than you expected. The silence broke into whispers. Guests leaned toward each other, phones coming out, some recording. Madison's face flushed dark red. Blake put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off. You let me, she stopped, her breath coming quick. You let me book this place, you let me pay. You watched me plan everything, and you never said, you never asked, I said simply. You called, you demanded, you complained about napkin colors to Diane, but you never once asked who owned the building you were so impressed by. You just assumed it couldn't be your loser brother. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping. Owen, this is highly inappropriate. Madison's wedding is not the time. She made it the time. I met my mother's eyes across the room when she decided to toast to the family loser in front of 200 people. I'm just setting the record straight. Madison's hand tightened on her champagne flute. For a moment I thought she might throw it. Instead, she laughed, a high, brittle sound that made several guests flinch. Fine, fine, you own a building. Congratulations, Owen, you're a landlord. That doesn't make you successful. That doesn't make you anything except lucky. Lucky, the word surprised me into a short laugh. Madison, I worked construction for 8 years to save the down payment. I learned electrical work, plumbing, historical restoration. I spent every weekend for 18 months rebuilding this place. That's not luck. That's work. Blake cleared his throat, clearly desperate to salvage the moment. Look, everyone, let's pour the champagne and move on. Owen, buddy, we appreciate everything you've done with the venue. Madison didn't mean, yes, she did. I looked at my sister, seeing past the rage to the confusion underneath. Madison has always meant it, and I've let her because I thought maybe she'd grow out of it. Maybe she'd see me eventually. I picked up my water glass from the nearest table. But you know what? I don't need her to see me. I know what I've built. I know what I'm worth, and it has nothing to do with her opinion. I raised the glass slightly, a quiet gesture. Congratulations on your wedding, Madison. I hope your marriage is built on something stronger than contempt. Then I drank, set the glass down, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the whispers grew into conversation. Someone said, "Did that really just happen?" Someone else murmured, "I always thought Owen seemed nice." Madison's voice rose sharp and desperate, trying to regain control, but the moment had shifted. The story had changed. I made it to the conservatory, the glass-walled room where I'd replaced every cracked pane myself before Diane caught up with me. "That," she said, slightly breathless, "was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed." She handed me my coat from the staff closet. "What now? Now I go home." I shrugged into the coat, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, and Madison has a choice to make. What choice? Whether to finish her reception in a venue owned by the brother she just humiliated, or cut the night short and live with the story everyone's going to tell. I looked back through the conservatory glass toward the ballroom where chaos rippled through the crowd. "Either way, she'll remember this wedding." Diane touched my arm gently. "For what it's worth, you handled that with more grace than she deserved." I smiled, tired but genuine. Grace is easy when you know who you are. I left through the service entrance, the same door I'd used 100 times while building this place. The December air smelled clean and cold. My phone buzzed with messages, friends asking if the video circulating on social media was real, acquaintances from high school suddenly remembering my name. I turned it off and drove home, where my refinished kitchen table waited and my life continued exactly as it had before, except now the truth was out. I didn't hear from Madison that night, or the next day, or the day after that, but I heard from everyone else. My mother called Sunday morning, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Owen, what you did at your sister's wedding was unacceptable. You humiliated her in front of Charleston's most prominent families. Blake's parents are mortified. Madison has been crying for 2 days." She paused, waiting for an apology that didn't come. "You need to call her and apologize immediately." I sat on my back porch with coffee I'd made in a French press salvaged from an estate sale. "Mom," Madison called me the family loser in front of 200 people. I corrected her. "If that's humiliating, maybe she should think before she speaks." She was nervous. It was her wedding day. You know she didn't mean. She meant every word. I watched mourning doves peck at seeds I'd scattered yesterday. She's meant every word for 20 years. The difference is now everyone knows she was wrong. My mother's silence felt like ice. When she spoke again, her voice had gone cold and formal. "Your father and I need to discuss your behavior. We'll call you next week." She hung up before I could respond. My father called Monday afternoon. His approach was different, lawyer tactical, concerned about liability. "Owen, I need to understand the business structure here. This LLC that owns Hartwell Estate, are you the sole member? What about insurance? If Madison decides to pursue legal action for emotional distress?" "Dad," I corrected a lie, "that's not actionable. You embarrassed her at her own wedding." His voice sharpened. "That's not just correction, that's retaliation. And if it affects her reputation, her career, her marriage, then maybe she shouldn't have spent our entire lives making me feel worthless." The words came out harder than I'd intended. I softened my tone. "Dad, I don't want to fight. But I'm not apologizing for telling the truth about what I do." "What you do," he said slowly, "is manual labor with a title. You're still working with your hands, Owen. You're still building things that matter." I finished. "Creating beauty, preserving history, yeah, Dad, I am. And I'm proud of it." I hung up gently but firmly, my hands steady around the phone. The real surprise came Tuesday morning. Blake showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find Madison's husband in jeans and a Patagonia fleece, his perfect hair slightly disheveled. He looked like he hadn't slept well. "Owen, can we talk?" I stepped aside and let him in. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom in an old building I was slowly renovating, but it was mine. Blake looked around at my second-hand furniture and DIY shelves with something that might have been curiosity or confusion. "Coffee?" I offered. "Sure, thanks." He sat on my refinished couch like it might collapse. "Look, I'm not here to defend Madison. What she said at the wedding was cruel. I told her that. We've been fighting about it since Saturday." I poured 2 cups and handed him one. "Why are you here, Blake?" He stared into the coffee. "Because she doesn't understand what she did wrong. She keeps saying you ambushed her, that you made her look stupid on purpose." And I realized. He looked up, meeting my eyes. I realized I don't know anything about you. Madison talks about you like you're a failure, but you own one of Charleston's most successful venues. You built something from nothing, and I never asked about it because I believed her story. I sat in the armchair across from him. What story did she tell you? That you were the family disappointment, that you dropped out of college and drifted through construction jobs. That your parents worried about you constantly. Blake set his cup down carefully. But Saturday night, after everyone left, I looked up your LLC, Barrett Property Restoration. You've flipped 36 properties in 7 years. You've restored 4 historic buildings. You employ 12 people full-time. He shook his head. That's not drifting, that's building an empire. It's building a life, I corrected. Not an empire. I'm not trying to compete with you or Madison or anyone else. I just wanted to do work that mattered to me. Does Madison know any of this? She never asked. I picked up my own coffee, and I stopped trying to tell her years ago. It's hard to explain success to someone who's already decided you've failed. Blake rubbed his face with both hands. She's talking about suing you for emotional distress or breach of contract or something. She called 3 lawyers yesterday. Her parents are encouraging it. Let her sue. I felt surprisingly calm about the prospect. The contract was fulfilled exactly as specified. She got the venue, the service, the experience she paid for. The fact that I own it doesn't change the product she received. That's what the lawyers told her. Blake smiled weakly. They also said she'd look ridiculous pursuing it, that the case would get laughed out of court, which made her angrier. Blake, why are you really here? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Because I married someone I'm not sure I know. Because watching you walk out of that ballroom with your head up after she tried to destroy you in front of everyone, he stopped. That took more strength than anything I've ever done, and I don't know if Madison has that kind of strength or if she even wants it. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. Blake stood, leaving his coffee mostly untouched. For what it's worth, you handled everything with more class than I would have, and you're right, Madison has always looked down on you, but I think it's because she's scared. Scared of what? That you figured out something she hasn't, how to be happy without constantly proving yourself. He headed for the door, then paused. If she calls you, if she tries to apologize, which I don't think she will, but if she does, just know it's coming from someone who's confused and hurt and too proud to admit she was wrong. After Blake left, I sat on my porch and thought about Madison at 8 years old, showing me her straight-to report card like it was a medal. Madison at 16, making captain of the debate team and sleeping with the trophy beside her bed. Madison at 25, getting promoted and calling everyone she knew to share the news. Madison had spent our whole lives building a resume while I'd been building things I could touch. Maybe Blake was right, maybe she was scared, but that didn't make what she'd said hurt less. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Diane called at 7 in the morning. Owen, I hate to bother you on your day off, but there's a situation at Hartwell. I was there in 20 minutes. The situation was my mother standing in the main ballroom with her arms crossed, her expression carved from marble. Mom, I stopped in the doorway. What are you doing here? I came to see it. She gestured around the ballroom, the restored chandeliers, the refinished floors, the crown molding I'd meticulously repaired. I wanted to see what my son built while I was busy being disappointed in him. The words hung between us like smoke. I walked slowly into the room, my footsteps echoing. And it's beautiful. Her voice cracked slightly. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Owen. Every detail is perfect, every restoration respectful. You didn't just renovate a building, you brought it back to life. I felt something tight loosen in my chest. Thank you. I owe you an apology. She moved toward one of the windows, sunlight catching her gray hair. I spent so many years measuring you against Madison. Her achievements were easy to understand, grades, titles, promotions. But what you do, she touched the windowsill, running her fingers over wood I'd carefully restored. What you do is art, and I was too narrow-minded to see it. Mom, I don't need— Yes, you do. She turned to face me, her eyes wet. You needed me to see you, you needed me to be proud, and I wasn't. I was embarrassed by my son who worked with his hands when I should have been amazed by my son who worked miracles. She took a shaky breath. Madison was wrong about you. But so was I, and I'm sorry. I crossed the ballroom and hugged her, feeling her surprise before she hugged back. I forgive you, I said quietly. but you need to talk to Madison because she's the one who needs to hear this most." My mother pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Madison isn't ready to hear it. She's still angry, still convinced you ruined her wedding." "I didn't ruin anything. I just refused to be invisible anymore." "I know." She squeezed my hands. "Give her time. Madison has built her entire identity on being the successful one. Having that challenged, it's shaken her foundation. She'll come around, eventually." Madison didn't come around for 6 weeks. January passed in a blur of renovation projects and winter weddings. I threw myself into work, restoring a Victorian house in the historic district and designing a new garden feature for Hartwell's spring season. Diane reported that the story of Madison's wedding had become local legend. The sister who didn't know her brother built her dream venue. Some people thought it was funny, others found it inspiring. A few saw it as revenge. I tried not to care about any of it. My mother called weekly, updating me on Madison's state of mind with the detachment of a weather report. "She's not speaking to us much. Blake says she's working extra hours to avoid dealing with it." Then, she deleted all her wedding photos from social media. "And finally, she asked about you yesterday, just asked if you were okay. I think that's progress." My father called once, awkward and formal, to say he'd been wrong. "Your business model is sound. Your properties are appreciating. I spoke to a colleague who knows commercial real estate and he was impressed by your portfolio." It wasn't an apology for the years of dismissal, but it was something. I accepted it as the best he could offer. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday in late January. I was at a property on King Street meeting with an architect about converting the second floor into apartments when my phone rang with Madison's number. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Hello, Owen." Her voice sounded small. "Are you busy?" "I'm at a work site. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. She paused. "Can I come see what you're working on? I'm downtown. I could be there in 10 minutes. I gave her the address, hung up, and told the architect we'd resume in 30 minutes. Then I waited in the gutted second floor, surrounded by exposed brick and contractor's dust, wondering what version of my sister would show up. Madison arrived in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy ponytail. No makeup, no armor. She looked around the space with wide eyes. "What is this place?" "It was a hardware store in the 1920s. I bought it last year. We're converting the upper floors into residential units while keeping the original storefront." I gestured toward where new walls would go. 4 apartments, historically accurate details, modern utilities. It'll be done by summer. She walked the perimeter slowly, running her hand along the brick. "You really do this, build things, restore them. That's what I've been trying to tell you." "I know." She stopped at a window overlooking King Street. I didn't want to believe it. It was easier to think you were wasting your life, because if you weren't wasting it, if you were actually successful, then I had to face what I'd done to you. I leaned against a support beam. "What did you do, Madison?" "Made you small." Her voice shook. "Made you the family joke so I could feel bigger. Used you as a measuring stick for my own success. Every time Mom worried about you, I felt better about myself. Every time Dad complained about your choices, I felt validated in mine." She turned to face me, tears on her cheeks. "And at my wedding, when I had everything I thought I wanted, I still needed to cut you down, because deep down I was terrified." "Of what?" "That you were happier than me." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "That you'd figured out something I was killing myself to achieve. You work with your hands and you're content. You live in a small apartment and you're satisfied. You don't need anyone's approval." And I realized at my wedding, standing there in a $50,000 dress, surrounded by people I barely like, I realized I've never felt that way, not once. The admission sat between us like something fragile. I didn't touch it immediately. Madison continued, her words coming faster now. "Blake and I have been fighting about the wedding, about how I treat people, about what I actually want from life. He asked me last week what makes me happy and I couldn't answer. I listed accomplishments, promotions, but not one thing that actually brings me joy." She laughed bitterly. "You know what does make me happy? Sunday mornings. Blake makes pancakes and we read the paper. That's it. That's the only time I feel like I'm not performing." "Then why do you perform the rest of the time?" "Because I don't know how to stop." She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the dusty floor. "Mom and Dad raised us to achieve, to compete, to measure worth in titles and salaries, and I was good at it, really good. But you walked away from that race and I hated you for it because you made it look easy. I sat across from her, cross-legged like we were kids again. It wasn't easy, it was terrifying. I failed twice before Hartwell worked. I maxed out 3 credit cards. I worked 80-hour weeks for years. I picked up a piece of old brick, turning it in my hands. But I was building something I believed in, not something that would impress people at cocktail parties. Is it worth it, the risk, every time? I set the brick down. Madison, I'm not rich. I don't have a downtown condo or a luxury car, but I own my work. I see the results. When someone gets married at Hartwell, I know I helped create that moment. When families move into these apartments, I'll know I gave them a beautiful place to live. That matters more to me than anything else. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry for the wedding. For everything before that, for making you feel worthless when you're anything but. She looked up, meeting my eyes. I don't know if I can change. I don't know if I can stop being the person who needs external validation, but I want to try. Start with one thing, I suggested. One thing you do just because it makes you happy, not because it looks good or earns respect, just because it feels right. Like what? I smiled. You used to paint, remember, watercolors. You filled sketchbooks with beach scenes and gardens. You were good at it. Madison's eyes widened. I haven't thought about that in years. Maybe start there. Paint something on Sunday morning while Blake makes pancakes. See how it feels. She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. Hope maybe, or possibility. Owen, I know I don't deserve it, but would you want to get coffee sometime? Like actual siblings, not people performing family? I'd like that. I stood and offered her a hand. But you're buying. You can afford it, Mrs. Montgomery. She took my hand, let me pull her up, and for the first time in years, she smiled at me without edge or performance. Just smiled. We stood in that gutted space, dust motes floating in winter sunlight, sounds of construction echoing up from below, and I felt something settle that had been loose my entire life. Madison wasn't magically fixed. One conversation didn't erase 2 decades of hurt, but it was a foundation. And I knew how to build on foundations. For what it's worth, Madison said as we headed down the stairs, Hartwell Estate really is the most beautiful venue I've ever seen. The garden especially. Those roses, David Austins and hybrid teas, I planted them in phases so something's always blooming. I held the door open for her. You want to see the plans for the spring installation? Yes, she surprised us both with her enthusiasm. I actually really do. We walked down King Street together, talking about gardens and restoration and the difference between achievement and fulfillment. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't healing. But it was a start. And starts, I knew from years of rebuilding broken things, were often the most important part. 3 months later, on a warm April afternoon, Madison showed up at my apartment with a folder and a nervous expression. I have something to show you, she said, settling onto my couch like she belonged there. She'd been coming over weekly since January, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to sit quietly while I worked on renovation plans. Blake joined us occasionally, the 3 of us developing an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. She opened the folder to reveal watercolor sketches. Beach scenes like she used to paint, but these were different, more confident, more alive. I'm taking a class, Tuesday nights. Blake encouraged me to show these in a local gallery's amateur showcase. I studied them carefully. They were good, really good. Full of light and movement and something that looked like joy. These are beautiful, Madison. They're terrifying. She laughed nervously. Putting them out there, knowing they might be rejected or criticized, I almost backed out twice. But then I thought about you walking out of my wedding with your head up, and I figured if you could do that, I could handle a small gallery show. When is it? Next month, May 15th. You'll come? Absolutely. I handed back the folder. How's work? She made a face. I actually quit. Well, I'm transitioning to freelance consulting. Fewer hours, more flexibility. Blake and I want to start trying for a baby, and I realized I can't do that while working 60-hour weeks. She paused. Mom had opinions about my decision. I bet she did, but Dad surprised me. He said sometimes the smartest business decision is knowing when to pivot. Madison smiled. I think you've been influencing him. He's been asking about your projects. He even toured the King Street property last week. That was news to me, but I filed it away to think about later. How do you feel about freelancing? Scared, excited, free. She curled into the couch cushions, like I'm finally building something for myself instead of performing for an audience. You were right about that. Everything I've done has been performance, not the paintings. I nodded toward the folder. Those are yours. She touched the folder gently, protectively. Yeah, they are. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, spring breeze moving through open windows. Then Madison spoke again, her voice tentative. Owen, I have a weird question. Would you want to partner on something? What kind of something? A community art space. There's an old church building near Hampton Park, you know, the one with the beautiful bones but completely run down. It's going to auction next month. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos. I was thinking, what if we restored it together, made it a place for art classes, galleries, community events, your restoration skills, my event planning experience. We could apply for grants, get community funding. I studied the photos. The building was a disaster, sagging roof, broken windows, decades of neglect. But underneath I could see the bones, high ceilings, good light, architectural details worth saving. That's a massive project, I know. But I've been learning about nonprofits, and there's real community need for accessible art spaces. We could offer free or sliding scale classes, gallery space for local artists, a place where success isn't measured in dollars but in what we create together. She looked at me hopefully. What do you think? I thought about the building we could restore, the people we could serve, my sister finding her way back to art through watercolors, myself building something not for profit but for purpose. I think we should go look at it tomorrow, I said. And bring someone who knows structural engineering and probably a hazmat inspector. Madison's face lit up. Really? Really? I smiled at my sister, not the polished, perfect version she'd presented to the world for years, but the real one underneath, messy and hopeful and finally authentic. But I have one condition. What? We do this as equals, no competition, no scorekeeping, just two people building something that matters. She extended her hand, formal and solemn. Deal. We shook on it, and in that moment I felt the last piece of old hurt finally settle. Madison would probably always be complicated. Our relationship would take ongoing work, like any restoration project, patient, careful, and committed to preserving what was good while fixing what was broken. But that was okay. I'd built a career on restoration. I knew how to take broken things and make them beautiful again, even families, even sisters, even the relationships we thought were too damaged to save. The important thing was the foundation. And now finally we had one worth building on.